to the Ted Wallison Podcast.
Well, welcome everybody to another episode of the Ted Wallison Podcast. Thanks for taking the time to be with us. Thanks to Tom Mahalik and the fine folks at Tom's Place, 190 Baldwin in the heart of Kensington Market. That's where you should go this season and any time of the year, really, for the best values in fine men's clothing, formal or casual attire. They're open 7 days a week. They're in the heart of Kensington Market. 190 Baldwin, that's where you'll find them. That's where you'll find terrific savings. Tom's Place will suit you. And thanks to Paul Gadd, our executive producer, for his assistance on this and every program. And don't forget, drop by our website, tedwallison.ca, and check out our past episodes. And make sure you subscribe to us on our YouTube channel. You know, of all the great entertainers Canada has produced in its 158 years, few, if any, were more beloved than John Candy. He was uproariously funny, generous, kind, and loving, but he was also a troubled man. In his book, John Candy, A Life in Comedy, author Paul Myers takes us on a journey through John's life and career, from his early days at SCTV to his first solo box office hit, Uncle Buck. Welcome, Paul Myers. Paul, it is a pleasure meeting you. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Pleasure to meet you, man. I listened to you for years, like when I was back in Toronto and everything. It was just, to hear your voice on the radio. It's so cool.
That's very kind of you to say that. I got to tell you, while we're exchanging pleasantries and compliments, I love the book. I literally couldn't put it down. I just kept, I guess maybe part of it is because I knew John. And I was just so enveloped by the whole thing. And I'm watching it, and I'm so excited watching his career start, and from SCTV and building through the films and gets into the big films and starts making $3-4 million. And then when I got to the last couple of chapters, all of a sudden this sadness swept over me because I knew how this was inevitably going to end, which is so silly because we all know how it's going to end. But it kind of bummed me out in the last couple of chapters. I have to tell you, I mean, it was sad, and it sat with me for a couple of days after. I'm honest to God, that's the truth.
Well, first I want to say I'm only smiling because I'm thanking you for catching the way I told the story, because that's exactly the way I wanted to tell the story, and the fact that you were there and can witness and verify that these events did happen as they are depicted. I wanted the reader, it's almost like a forensic study. You go in, you interview everybody you can to get a sense of what's going on with no agenda. You don't have you're not trying to prove a point. I'm not going in there saying, he's all sad or he's all happy. I just want to tell the story. But what I wanted you to do is feel the excitement of him finding out that he has talent, finding out that he can do improv, accidentally being led into it by Dan Aykroyd, accidentally ending up with Bill Murray in Chicago, accidentally being on the first cast of Second City Television, and accidentally ending up in Stripes. And like they all seem like accidents at the time, because a lot of people are talented, but not everybody gets the call. No. And so we see him and we start to root for him. Also the football injury, the idea that he had a football injury in high school. And you think of that movie Sliding Doors, where if you'd gone one other direction, this wouldn't have happened. And there's so much happenstance that can happen even if you're talented. And he turned out he was extremely talented, and he also was emotionally intelligent, and he brought that to his acting and his comedy. So what I wanted you to feel at the beginning parts of the book was the rise, if only so that you really understood the catastrophic feeling it was when he passed away suddenly at 43. There's 3 whole chapters dealing with that, because you have to.
I know.
Sorry I made you sad, but
no.
It is the inevitable end of the book that we all knew going in.
It honestly, God, I was almost embarrassed. I thought, do I even say this? Do I even tell Paul this? But I thought, no. I got to tell him this, because that's the way I honestly felt about it,
You have to, like Paul McCartney said, in some ways take a sad song and make it better. But at the same time, the better is, think of that legacy chapter at the end when we're talking about all the people who were at the funerals, the 2 funerals. He had 2 funerals, that's how popular he was. Also the younger actors, and I say younger, but like Ben Stiller, the generation that came just after him, or 2 generations after, Josh Gad, all these people, Patton Oswalt, all these people who are contemporaries, talking about how even now, 31 years later, they still have a strong place in their heart for what Candy brought to them when they were starting out. So it's just,
I tell people, younger people, I tell them, John's name comes up, and my son might say to his friends, "Well, my dad knew John," and they look at me, "Yeah, no, you didn't." And I said, "Yeah, I did. I mean, were we close friends? No. We got along really well. We did some stuff together, and and for the younger generation that were born after he died or just before he died, they look upon him as, wow, God, he was. And I just think, how much could he have done if he had continued, if he lived? I mean, we discover, toward the end, that he can be and would have been a brilliant actor, dramatic actor as well. He wasn't just a funny guy. He was a great talent. But and I wonder how everybody, whoever met John or knew about John, I think felt the same things, that he was incredibly talented, that he was a warm, generous, giving man, really giving man. Yet, how many really knew how troubled he was and how much he carried inside him? A lot of it stemming from the death of his father at a young age, and how he developed this almost crippling anxiety and these numerous major league panic attacks, especially in crowds that were there to see him. And he loved being with the people. And yet here he's conflicted physically and mentally, because he's loving being with these people, but he's freaking out inside.
No, and so it's inescapable. I said to somebody, they said, is there a dark side to the story at all? Because they didn't want to know if it turned out to be a bad person.
Yeah.
And I said, don't worry. The enemy was within. The enemy in the story is his own anxiety. And here's what I would say to that, though. It's also a study. My book is a study of what celebrity was like in the 80s and 90s, in a sense, and maybe even the late 70s, where people in general weren't as aware of phrases like mental health,
No.
and celebrities especially didn't they didn't have a way to talk about things in public, because you're supposed to be up all the time. And secondly, I don't think he really did. Like, he had his physical issues, but he also had body shaming, which was much more rampant. I mean, it's pretty bad now, but it was really, really rampant. Nobody even knew the term body shaming, because there wasn't a word castigating people for doing it.
No, there wasn't.
So this guy endured so much, and being a people pleaser, and having been the kind of, even though he was the youngest of two boys, he was the man of the house pretty instantly at the age of 6. He was 5 when his father died. And roughly, once he starts to learn how to drive, he's his mother's chauffeur. He's taking care of people. He's modeled on taking care of people, making them feel at ease, and making them happy. And luckily for all of us, he was super gifted at being funny. And so, but he used that humor, I think, to keep people happy around him. So he had happy people around him because he was making them happy. But that's a lot of weight to carry on your shoulders. And I think that's what we learned towards the end, is that being a people pleaser and working the crowd at the Toronto Argonauts games, he would not leave until the last autograph was signed. He had to hire somebody to tell him to go away, to pull him out.
Literally.
And he didn't want to, but he realized he was starting to have sweats. He was starting to have like panics. He couldn't breathe. So he did work himself into a place where I think today, maybe you see it in pop stars a lot, where they'll take 6 months off in the middle of their biggest year, and you're like, what? And they go, well, I want to be doing this in 10 years. Like, I want to still be around next year. So John probably could have benefited, but coulda, shoulda, woulda, who knows, right?
I know. You talk about the whole fat shaming thing. When he did the film Stripes, the Ivan Reitman film, which was a huge box office success and meant a lot in his trajectory, in his career trajectory. But there was one scene in there, the mud wrestling scene, that he hated. He despised the concept. But as a trooper, he went along and did it. And of course, it was all about fat shaming, and there's a great quote where he talks about, I'm sensitive about my weight, and I hate fat jokes, and people didn't, some people just didn't catch on to it at all. They thought that he enjoyed being the big roly-poly guy, and let's play along with the big roly-poly guy. He didn't want to be seen as big roly-poly guy. One of the reasons why he dressed so well.
He dressed so well, and he put a lot of emphasis into his eyes. Like, when he acted, the thing that most people endure, the image that endures with John Candy, most people remember his smiling face. They don't think about his body as much. They do think about his body, but the cover of our book is it's a black and white photograph of the friendliest smile you've ever seen and the most twinkling, gorgeous eyes. Like I've stared into John's beautiful eyes many times. I'm not ashamed to say. And the thing is, I think that's because he, the expression women often will say, "My eyes are up here." I think he really wanted you to see. He wanted to see he was giving you his humanity, and in return, we saw we felt seen, so there was all of that going on that was all about the other things. But here's that people pleaser thing. He gets offered this thing to do this part in Stripes, and he there's that lean mean fighting machine speech, which is really kind of true. As you see in the book, he did actually try to join the army at one point to lose weight. But in that movie, he accepts Ivan Reitman putting him in that situation and says, "I guess I gotta do this." So he did parts on SCTV that were the joke. He played Hefty Neil, like a play on words on Neil Hefty, the composer. But Hefty Neil was the joke of the name was big guy, and the great Fatsby and all these things. He would do them, but he didn't love it, and it wasn't his idea. But he thought, I better do it because everyone wants me to laugh. Everyone wants me to make fun of myself.
And at the same time, he was concerned about others. He was really into the concept of equity amongst his peers. Like when SCTV first started and when the first paycheck came in, he realized that he, Catherine O'Hara, and Andrea Martin were being paid less than everyone else because they weren't considered to be, quote, writers, which was a stupid thing to think of with the concept when you consider so much of it was improv. How do you designate a writer when the actors themselves are improving? And in fact, as Dave Thomas points out in your book, that it was John's idea to throw the televisions off the apartment building, a balcony, for the opening sequence of SCTV, something that sticks in everyone's mind today, something that grabbed everybody's attention. But he wasn't a writer, and he was pissed big time about that.
Well, no, he was majorly pissed. And I had conversations also with Andrew Alexander, who was in charge of, the whole production. Yeah. And he remembers the meeting very, very clearly. And he just, I guess they all thought that somebody else had decided to do that. And I think to some extent, Harold Ramis gets thrown under the bus for it, too, a little bit, which is unfortunate because he's not here to defend himself. But there was a sense that the traditional writers who worked with a typewriter didn't see the guys, the cast members who were doing essentially live writing, every night at the Second City Theater, the Fire Hall in Toronto, they would do make-em-ups, and those make-em-ups were actually coming up with characters and dialogue and all the things, and also intention, all the things that writers do. So when they started writing for television, there was a sense, and that's when Dave Thomas, who was from advertising, he started to recognize that an ideas person is a writer too. And he said, look at those little napkins he writes on. Those are writing. He's writing little ideas on cocktail napkins. The other guys can type them up, but the idea came from John and the TV idea. So that's the other thing about Dave Thomas. Coming from advertising, he said, oh my God, he worked at McCann Erickson. And he said, when I heard that TV idea, like he just knew that was like an award-winning ad almost. Because if you're trying to do a revolutionary program that's taking on television as a medium, throw it out the window. Literally throw the television out the window. It's a little bit it's also a little bit rock and roll, a little bit of a nod to Keith Moon, the riot house in Los Angeles, people throwing stuff out of their windows. And what better young people's comedy revolution image do you need than throwing TVs off a balcony? Do not do this at home.
No. You talk at the beginning of the book about two locations in Toronto, which really should have plaques on them right now. One is a house on Avenue Road where they all hung out. When I say all, the people who eventually became cast members of SCTV, some of whom were in Godspell, like Eugene and Marty Short and
Andrea,
and Andrea as well. And he always joked around, I hate Godspell. Because they always used to sing. All they do is sit around and sing day by day, every day, right?
Exactly. Theater people. It was like a big thing between him and Martin Short,
Yeah.
So
there's that place. Yeah. There's that place that they all hung out at, and then a booze can, basically, that Dan Aykroyd ran on Queen Street. And all these people and all these people that you meet at the beginning of the book, they all keep showing up throughout his life because he hires them for a part in a movie or a part on Radio Candy, his brilliant radio program.
That's right. He did radio shows.
Or they hire him. Dan hired him for a film that he was doing, and they all. And that's how much friendship meant to him, and how loyal he was. And I think that's a quality that you don't see in where you live right now in Hollywood, right?
Well, okay.
Unfortunately.
There's two things I want to say. One is, let's get to that in a second, if you don't mind, because I have thoughts on that too about this book. But the thing about the Toronto in early 1970s was we came out of the whole Confederation year celebration with a sense of pride in let's define ourselves. Let's put ourselves on the world stage. You know, let's not define ourselves in the shadow of the United States. But there's also a lot of Canadian ethics involved in improv comedy, because it's about yes and agreeing and adding. And when the Second City style of humor came from Chicago, Joe Flaherty in my book says, you know, he came up with it he's from Pittsburgh and he came from the Chicago cast. He said as he became part of the Toronto cast, he saw a new version of improv emerging that was much more collective, you know, almost socialist. You know, it was improv, collective theater, where everybody took care of each other as well and made sure that the scene was elevated and no person's ego was necessarily just there for they weren't there for the sake of their own ego. They were there for the scene. They were there for each other. That ethic continued when they all went into other shows and other things. And they all recognized, and Ivan Reitman says this, one of the reasons he hired a lot of Second City people is because they came fully trained. And Dan Aykroyd talks about this too. You know, even at Saturday Night Live, they recognized that this ethic of, you know, and some of them had it in the National Lampoon Roadshow. And there was, you know, later there would be the Groundlings in Los Angeles. This ethic of agreeable comedy where you work with each other, it trains ensemble actors. And to this day, Eugene Levy and Catherine O'Hara did Schitt's Creek, but Christopher Guest hired a lot of those people to be in his film. Some of those people from Chicago Second City. So you're right. There's a sense that they were all in the same university together.
Yeah.
But there is something about the Canadian wing of it, like even the fact that Rick Moranis got the part in Ghostbusters after Dan Aykroyd gave it to John Candy, and Candy didn't think he could do it the way he wanted to do it. So they said, well, what about Rick Moranis? Yeah. So now Rick Moranis had a film career. So, and he wasn't from Second City Stage, but he was from the TV show. So they all knew each other, you know?
Second City television was groundbreaking. I mean, you hear people talking about it to this day. I mean, you know, Conan O'Brien, huge fan of, and Conan O'Brien met John at Harvard because he was the head of the Harvard Lampoon, right? And
that's right.
So many people were affected by it, and you look back, and when you watch some of it now, years later, and you think, wow, it made me laugh now, and it makes me laugh now, but now I realize the brilliance behind it as well. Where then it was more just make me laugh. Now I'm laughing and I'm thinking at the same time. And the character of Johnny LaRue, which was probably his biggest character in the show, I think that or one of the Schmengies, we'll talk about that too. But Johnny LaRue, as he pointed out, he says, served as a reminder to himself of what kind of person not to be.
Johnny LaRue was an extension of his own unchecked ego if he'd let it be unchecked. And so he could, he could indulge in the licentiousness of Johnny LaRue and also the self-delusion of Johnny LaRue. Johnny LaRue is a character that's based on, you know, speaking of the American president right now, he's that kind of character. He's a guy who thinks he runs the world and he thinks he's smarter than everyone else. And we can constantly see, let's not talk about Trump so much right now, but let me say that Johnny LaRue, the genius of it was you cared about him. We felt sorry for him for being such a loser sometimes. And that's John Candy's human intelligence, emotional intelligence and humanity shining through, because he's saying, aren't we all sometimes a little over our heads and think we have this under control? Which is, I don't even know if there's a part where they're thinking this stuff out loud, but they had an intellect about the way they approached what they made fun of. They never really punched down, I don't think. No. They mostly punched up, but they also punched outside of world politics. They pretty much stayed to human situations or great cultural celebrities that were only famous to them. Like they would do a parody of something that was just, like later when they did the Bob Hope meets Woody Allen sketch, like who's asking for that? Who's asking for it?
Nobody.
But it's funny. Or George Carlin goes to Mayberry RFD, or Merv Griffin. Like those were people that maybe weren't even necessarily culturally relevant at the time, but they were having a lot of fun with it. And Johnny LaRue was just a great there's a great arc where he wants a bigger budget for his productions, and Guy Caballero, played by Joe Flaherty, wasn't going to let him have the budget. And then eventually he brings shame to the network by overspending, and then they put him on the street with a single camera doing street interviews, and that becomes his biggest character arc moment because he finally gets a crane shot, a beloved crane shot. So you have this Martin Scorsese angle above him. And it's like he gets that for Christmas from either God or Santa Claus. I'm not really sure. And but that was built into several episodes. So the Johnny LaRue character was probably one of the few really enduring. Oh no, actually, they're all pretty. All the people who worked at SCTV, the characters were Guy Caballero and Edith Prickley. They were all very much integral to the show, and Earl Camembert and Floyd Robertson, like all these people. I tell you, if you don't know SCTV, it's so unique. It's so not of this world, and it's strangely cutting edge, even though the references are dated. And it's
I'm sorry, I was just going to say, and John refers to Saturday Night Live, which preceded SCTV as the show that sort of launched SCTV. Yet in the minds of most people right now, SCTV was 2-3 steps higher than the quality of Saturday
SCTV
Night
was
Live.
Andrew Alexander and Bernard Solins didn't want to lose any more talent, like they lost Gilda and Dan Aykroyd, and so they didn't want to lose any more. So they said we have to create our own show, and because they didn't have huge budgets, they built in a kind of naive folk art quality to the show. And it was low budget, but it was high concept. And so because of that, the network also there was no big money network leaning on them at the beginning. And then when they did get NBC money, by then they were safely in Edmonton, where no network executive from Hollywood would wish to tread. So and as Catherine O'Hara tells me in the book, they were protected. They might not have always been paid top dollar, but they were always given artistic control. So the Schmengies wouldn't have happened if Eugene Levy and John Candy weren't basically quarantined in a hotel in Edmonton in 30 below weather. They were watching a local polka show, and they started talking like the guys on the TV. And the next thing you know, they're like, how about they're a local cable access hosts that are beloved, but they kind of make fun of all of those shows, including my generation. I remember The Pig and Whistle, which was a British version of that. It was set in an English pub and was shot at CFTO television. And so the idea of ethnic-based community access, essentially dance and variety shows, was such a who's making fun of that on national TV? It was
those characters, Yash and Stan Schmengi, with John and Eugene. I mean, here are these guys were, quote, allegedly very successful in what they did, and yet they're cheating on their wives. There's not a lot of good things about their characters, but you couldn't help but to love both of them. And John managed to bring that out in all of his characters.
They were cheating on all three Lemon twins, which I thought was hilarious. That the three women that were in their lives were the Lemon twins. Like, and it's never explained why they said twins.
No.
But the last polka, is it's loosely based on The Last Waltz, and but it's a great little document that was made outside of SCTV. It's actually made for HBO, and you can see it on YouTube now. And that's the beautiful thing about this book. Yeah, you have a copy?
I actually have a small role in it.
Oh, wait a minute. That's right.
John hired me to play a disc jockey, which is what I was at the time.
Of course, that's right. I'm sorry. Yes.
No, it's okay. Ted Wallington. And it was recorded in CFRB Studios, which is like CRB is a very adult, straight station at this time. And not the place where the Schmengies are. But anyway, they used the studios. In the hour that it took to record that 5 minutes that we did, they never came out of character. It was the funniest hour I've ever spent, locked into a room with two people. They never stopped with the character. Because, of course, when you shoot, you change the lights 14 times, and this has to be altered. And so you do so many takes. And it's just like joke after joke. And, oh, God, I laughed so hard I was literally wiping my eyes.
Let me ask you guys something. How does it feel to be famous? I mean, I myself have some degree of notoriety here on the Ted Wellington Show on CKM in beautiful downtown Kitchener, but I'm talking about the capital F kind of fame, the I want to live forever kind of fame that the two of you have achieved over the years. How does it feel? And more important than that, has it changed your lives?
But that's That's a good question.
That is a good question.
I don't think we've been asked that one before.
No, that's a good question, you know that. And let me just say to you, Ted, that in all honesty, boy, you know, I don't think that this has affected me, this success thing has affected me at all. You know, other side of it, you know, I think that I'm just a normal, ordinary person. Like you, you know.
That's
ordinary.
right. I don't think that our lives have changed so much, Ted. You know, I think that we've made some music that has made us lots of money, let's be honest. But I don't think that... I feel like we're just two normal guys.
They did that a lot. They had a lot of people in the show that were representative of, you know, people that we knew at the time. Gord Martineau's in that. Oh man, I'm just trying to remember, like, so many names that I'm not even sure if everyone knows these names, but they think they shot at Sam the Record Man on Yonge Street at one point, doing an in-store, you know, and just like it was, you know, and again, they do this because they're so specific to what they're basing everything on, including writing a character that has a name just like your name and having you play it. It becomes universal though, because everybody in American markets and European markets would look at that and they'd say, that's just like small town Chicago, or that's just like the cable access guy, or the big market, you know, but like Los Angeles has a radio version of that, you know, and it was really, I think it was really, by the way, the whole idea of writing in names that are just like names is a little like the Ruddles. The Ruddles did that where they had George Harrison playing Eric Manchester, which was based on Derek Taylor. And, you know, all the characters had names that were a little bit like the person they were making fun of, you know, or having John Belushi as the Alan Klein character. Anyway, but I'm digressing. Comedy nerd alert. I just went off on a tangent.
Okay, that's okay. But one of the brilliant things about the Schmengi brothers, about the Last Polka, was that they were in the film. They were the parade masters. No, it's not. What's the term I'm looking for? Honorary parade marshals for the in Kitchener every year, which is just outside, for those people who don't know, it's just outside of Toronto. They have a huge Oktoberfest parade. That's right. John and Eugene, as the Schmengis, were the actual grand marshals of the parade, and they used that footage so they managed to get themselves in the actual parade to be in the documentary. It was brilliant.
Innovative, yes. I want to go back to something you said, because I did want to address it, which was, you know, I've been saying this on American programs lately, which is the story of John Candy resonates right now in 2025 when we're doing this conversation. It resonates because you do have a reign of cruelty and a lack of empathy in the American political discourse, for instance, and it flares up in Canada too. And one of the things that is really great about John Candy is that you couldn't make up a character like this. He's all about empathy, compassion, humanity, giving back, modeling humanity in all the work he did, and all the things he did off screen. And it's such a joy. It's been such a joy to go on a tour in Canada and the US, and also to be on radio and podcasts talking about this character who stood for all these things. And I'm not making it up. It's not like, oh, I needed to come up with a character that we could all pretend was this good guy. This guy existed. And on a Canadian level, I feel so excited to tell a story about somebody who, you know, aspired to and lived out that creed. And it's so gratifying that this character is, I'm really happy this year, and Ryan Reynolds did his with Colin Hanks, they did their film, and it's all coming out at the same time, which means that we're all getting this year to sort of look at him. He would have been 75 this year. Yeah. And it's such a great zeitgeist moment of everything coming together and us really needing John Candy, but John Candy being there. And, you know, and thankfully I'd been working for 3 years writing the entire story of it. So I'm ready for this moment. And I'm super proud of how it all came together. That's the other thing. I'm not wrapping this up or anything, but I'm just saying.
No.
I'm just adding to what I was saying about the empathy, you know?
You talk about the effect that he had on people. And I mentioned Conan O'Brien, and you mentioned Patton Oswalt, and there's Judd Apatow and a bunch of different people. But there were people that he touched personally, that he met even momentarily. A guy by the name of Mike Myers, your brother.
Oh yeah.
At a concert at Convocation Hall, when he was doing big city comedy, when he left SCTV and did his own show out of CTV studios, your brother met him backstage at Convocation Hall, to ask him for advice. Tell me that story.
It was even funnier than that. Mike's a kid and he's going down to see this thing and he's at the stage door, not backstage. He's literally waiting and no, it's cool. But to me, it's very cinematic. The moment really happened, but it feels like it's in a movie because you've got this kid and he's yelling, John, John, John. And Tim Kazurinsky was with him, who's another great comedian from that era. Yep. And they both they're all taking questions and signing things. And innocently, my brother, Mike, who we all know had a career eventually, he's just a kid. And he's saying, how do I get into comedy, Mr. Candy? And any other celebrity, not any other, but quite a few other celebrities could have said, don't bother, kid, or, hopefully you get lucky, or don't get into this business. It's horrible. Yeah. But he said, if you love comedy, go to take the Second City workshops downtown. If you're good at it and you love it, you'll enjoy taking the class. It'll be fun and you'll have a great few months learning comedy. And if you don't like it, you'll find out right away that that's not for you and you'll find something else to be interested in. He said, just find out, And then he said, and if you're good at it and you start doing it professionally, you still might not be famous, but you'll have a great day every day because you're doing a thing you love. Isn't that amazing that he told my brother that?
It is. And I just wanted, did Mike ever talk to John? Did he ever meet John after that and say, listen, you did this for me?
Well, no, he never got to say it. But what the PS of it all was many years later. So yeah, let's quickly say, so Mike does take Second City workshops. He does really well in his class. In his class, by the way, is Dave Foley and Kevin McDonald, who are also starting a comedy troupe called The Kids in the Hall. Yeah. My last book, you can see my last book for that story. Yes. I'm taking improv workshops too, because I'm like, Mike's doing it. I'm like, I want to try it. So just because we're brothers, we'll do everything. And I am a musician, but I'm there in the comedy class and I meet Dave Foley. And anyway, so all that's happening. Mike gets promoted to the main stage at Second City, eventually goes to England for a while, does a bunch of things there, comes back, ends up going to Saturday Night Live, the story. And then years later, he makes the movie Wayne's World. And he's at Wayne Gretzky's restaurant, which is so Canadian, right? Americans laugh when I say that. He's at Wayne Gretzky's restaurant with his best buddy, Davey McKenzie, who he's still best buddies with. And Davey says, look, there's John Candy. And Dave says, go over there and tell him you took the advice. And Mike's like, humble and a little scared that maybe John won't remember him. So it's like no, I don't want to bother him. Candy walks across the floor. Right. And I wasn't there, but I picture it being like the hand outstretched in Uncle Buck in the first scene where he introduces himself. And I pictured this, big John Candy walking across with a big smile. He goes, hey, Mike, saw Wayne's World. Congratulations, buddy. Way to go. And it was like, and he never got a chance. Mike never really told him, I got into this because of you, but it was just
probably froze.
He did. He kind of froze. And, Luckily, Mike's not in every book I write. Like he wasn't in my Todd Rundgren book at all. And he wasn't in my Kids in the Hall. He wasn't in my Bare Naked Ladies book. And he wasn't in my John Baldry book. But I put him in the Kids in the Hall book because they were coming up together. And he's in this at a very pivotal moment because that is a great example of Candy just giving great advice and being there for everybody else. And the effect he had on Mike, he also had that on Conan. So Conan O'Brien has that story where he's not sure if he wants to go into comedy, and Conan tells him, you don't think you're going to get into comedy, you just get into comedy. And it's the same thing. He was basically giving him the right advice that, and let's face it, if you're talented and you're inevitable, you're going to take good advice and not take other advice. But Candy was dispensing wisdom daily to everybody. Yeah. And also people who weren't in show business. Like he would help people out with, if they needed a veterinarian, like he knew a good doctor for that back problem you've got. Like he's that guy.
Ted Woloshyn returns in a moment.
I've had the great fortune to say that I've been associated with one of Toronto's finest names in men's clothing for more than 25 years. Tom's Place. Founded by Tom Mahalik father in 1958, Tom's Place offers brand name men's apparel at unbeatable prices. But more than that, they boast a long-serving, knowledgeable, and friendly staff that can assist you whether you're looking for casual or formal attire. And they have plenty of first-class tailors on site. In addition, Tom and his family are well known for their philanthropic work. So if you're looking to deal with great people who can fulfill your clothing desires at outstanding prices, do yourself a favor and visit Tom's Place. They're open weekdays from 11 to 6, Saturdays 10 to 5, and Sundays noon to 5. You'll find Tom's Place at 190 Baldwin in the heart of Kensington Market. Or check them out online at toms-place.com. Tom's Place will suit you.
Now back to Ted Wallachin.
Do you feel this vehicle is safe for highway travel?
Yes, I do. Yes, I really do. I believe that. I know it's not pretty to look at, but it'll get you where you want to go.
Now, you got no outside mirror.
No, we lost that.
You have no functioning gauges.
No, not a one. However, the radio still works. Funny as that may seem, with all this mess, that the radio is the only thing that's really working good, and it's as clear as a bell. Don't ask me how.
Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, as John was quoted as saying, it's like it was written for me.
It was.
And it kind of seems that way.
Well, it was. It was autobiographical for John Hughes, who wrote it, but John Hughes has more autobiography in the Neil Page character, which is Steve Martin's character, because John Hughes was working in advertising and commuting back to Chicago and Americans, as you may know, celebrate Thanksgiving like as a massive family. Everyone has to get home holiday. Yeah. And so he had this idea that, and he did have an encounter when he was a salesman where he did get rerouted and had to take several modes of transportation and met a salesman who was the salt of the earth, who was also kind of boorish and loud. But also he got a sense that this guy was built for this. This guy was built for flight cancellations. He knew what to do if he needed to get a taxi. And the life skills that guys like him, real road warriors, have, John Hughes didn't have those skills, and he was getting more stressed out about everything. And this guy was having a better time because once your flight's canceled, you got an excuse to hang out, And so he wanted to put that into a movie. But by this time, he knew John Candy, so he gave the part of Del Griffith much bigger weight in the story, because the story was really going to be. It could have just been another. Who would have played it? John Cusack, an ad executive, goes home for the weekend, tries to get home for the weekend, and he meets a bunch of different people. But in this case, they made it a buddy picture, a reluctant buddy picture, sort of like Midnight Run, where, in that movie, there's like two people who shouldn't be hanging out or forced to hang out together. And it's a potentially great story, or We're No Angels, two convicts on the lam who drive each other crazy. There's all these archetypes for that, but Candy, he understood John Candy to the point where he writes a character that is almost autobiographical for John Candy, and Candy knows it.
And it's just part of that whole John Hughes, John Candy relationship, which is not only on screen, but they were literally, well, not neighbors, but they were in the same neighborhood. Their kids were friends, were about the same age. They're as thick as thieves, as you can say, so to speak, right? Yeah. And I think it would have been John's first opportunity to show his dramatic range.
Yeah, I think really, there's pathos in some of the characters he played, when. In Stripes, when Ox is telling the story about wanting to become a lean, mean fighting machine, there's pathos, but it's kind of buried in the slapstick. But eventually he starts to bring it out, and more of the roles start to have a human side to them that is really big. By this point, in Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, it's very clear that the character of Del Griffith is a three-dimensional human. And that means he's trying to be the life of the party, much like John Candy, but he's also... the character is carrying sadness that we don't see, and literally carrying a lot of sadness in that trunk. And he's also carrying like things that I don't even know how to spoil it for people if they don't know the reveal. I assume a lot of people know the reveal, but he's carrying a sad story with him that we don't really hear until the end of the movie. And that scene, I mean, I keyed in on the first chapter of my book. The prologue is called "I Like Me" because it's the speech, and I had to get, Paramount had to clear the rights for me to put the whole speech in the book, because apparently that's what happens if you use an entire bit of dialogue. You have to get clearances. And then then Colin Hanks and Ryan Reynolds call their whole movie "I Like Me." So yes, I've since talked to Ryan Reynolds about this. We all recognize that moment independently as being the most autobiographical moment in the whole Candy. Can I say oeuvre on a podcast?
Yes, you may. Of course you can. We're bilingual.
The whole Candy oeuvre. The whole Candy oeuvre, that's right. Which just means eggs, really.
I know. Uncle Buck. It was John's first film as a solo starring role, which opened #1 in North America, stayed there for 4 weeks. Wow. What a career enhancer. And his salary went from 1 to 2 or 2 to 3 million at that point,
Yeah.
which today, by the way, is about 8 million.
Yeah, I was
7
thinking
million.
adjusted. It's about 8. Yeah, but
Yeah.
3 million a picture, even for something like Wagons East. Not to get into that too early, but it should be said that the reason he made a film like Wagons East is that he had a $3 million contract and couldn't get out of it. And who's not going to take a short-term detour for $3 million and then you can take the rest of the year off? You can look for another film that is a better film. But that's the life of the showbiz person,
At this point in John's career, he had done a number of films. They weren't all huge successes like Planes, Trains, and Automobiles or Uncle Buck. But in every one of those films, even if it was a flop or a semi-flop, they never took a shot at John. They would say it's unfortunate the director didn't bring out John's talent. It wasn't written properly for John. John became, quote, critic proof at that point. And that lasted almost right until the end of his career, which is incredible.
One of the things that I did a lot of first person interviews for this book, but I also did a lot of research. And one of the sort of fun parts of the research was every time he put out a movie, I would search the New York Times archive, the Chicago Tribune, all the major American film critics, and some Canadians like Brian D. Johnson and people like that. And I would see the ongoing dialogue they were having with John Candy's performances, Janet Maslin in the New York Times, or different famous film critics, and of course Roger Ebert was very much a champion, but also very tough on John Candy. I remember he didn't think Uncle Buck was a family picture. He thought Uncle Buck was nasty, mean, and violent, and carried way too much darkness for the tag that it was getting as a big family picture. But he's very critical of John, but as somebody who loved him, it was kind of a double-edged sword. Like I see the greatness in you and you didn't do it. He's mad at him, but it is interesting to see like Janet Maslin would also spare him and Pauline Kael liked him, the famous film critic. Pauline Kael, she singled him out in a couple of movies. And, there's a phrase, I don't know if we can use this language on your show, but it's better to be a hit in a shit than a shit in a hit. I heard somebody in showbiz say that, and it stuck with me forever. As gross as it is,
it's great.
If you can be the standout great performance in a film that is universally panned, people remember you.
Yes,
but they don't. And inversely, if you're the worst thing in a great movie, not good.
And there's a certain amount of pity as well. They feel sorry. Oh my God, it's too bad. You deserve better than that. But and so he was this critic-proof guy. And I wonder, we talk about improv and how many directors just would say, like John Hughes would say, just go nuts. You just sit back and say, don't worry about the script. Just this is where we're headed. Go nuts and do it. And
the irony of John Hughes, just want to say the irony of John Hughes is that he was one of the most almost the David Mamet level of scripting, of words chosen carefully. And he would write tons and tons of pages, more pages than you're allowed to shoot in a movie. And he would often go over, he would often use up more film than he'd been budgeted. But the part of what he did was he goes, you do my dialogue. And they loved his dialogue. You do my dialogue for 4 takes. And once we get the right one, you do 100 more takes where you're improvising. Yeah. And to the point where actually Candy and Steve Martin on the film Planes, Trains, and Automobiles got together and said, we're going to be here for another year if we don't stop John Hughes from letting us improvise. So they basically said, let's get back to the script because we need to finish the film so you can edit this 4-hour thing. It was not going to be a 4-hour film in release, and they had 4 hours of film, 4 hours of scenes.
And another incident which reminds me of the ad-libbing that went on was the scene that he filmed. He had a small role in Home Alone, and we'll talk more about that. But in Home Alone, the scene that he filmed with Catherine O'Hara, where they're allegedly on a bus. He's the polka king, right? And they're on this bus, but they're not on the bus or the truck. They're actually in a wooden crate.
They're in
an abandoned high school.
Yeah. Yeah, they're pretending that they're on the road. They're shooting the interior of a cube van that is parked inside a school. It's the same school that they shot other scenes in. In fact, the airport set was also around the corner from there because they had to get John in for one day. They only had him for one day, and they had like 3 setups, and then so it's Chris Columbus is directing, not Christopher Columbus. Chris Columbus is directing, who, by the way, was a great guy when I talked to him. He's one of the proteges of John Hughes, and he gets to do Home Alone, and is one of his big films for John Hughes's company. Who John Hughes wrote it, but John Hughes wants to come to the set that day because his buddy John's going to be there, and he's over Chris Columbus's shoulder. John Hughes's, during the Cube van scene, they're improvising, and Catherine O'Hara tells me about this too. And they were supposed to be there for an 8-hour day, and they end up doing 23 hours because John Hughes is now saying, "Okay, that's great. Now talk about that something," or Candy will make a suggestion in one improv, and he'll go do more on that, And I just want to say, Catherine O'Hara, who had done so much brilliant improvising with Candy at Second City Theater in Toronto, she wasn't allowed to do it because her character was just Kevin's mom. And so she couldn't throw down she couldn't jam with the guy because she had to sort of play almost straight, like basically a straight character. She was making smart choices that were funny, but she couldn't make the big guffaw laugh because the role was Candy's character was supposed to be the funny one in that scene. Yeah. And it was, she's playing
a mother who forgot her son back home, and she's freaking out. She can't be funny, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's the engine of the film, right? That's the whole reason. And it turns out Kevin was fine on his own, but that's all the story. But yeah, so they said it took that long. And, Candy had to go off and do another Hughes film while he was in the middle of shooting another John Hughes film at the time. So it was like a very interesting, a statement of the times. Is like, you go spend a whole day on one John Hughes film because you're busy on the other John Hughes film. Like,
one of the weird parts, and I couldn't understand it when I read it, and I had to read it over, to be honest with you, was John declined. He worked for Scale, but he declined. They said, we'll give you a percentage of the profits, and he declined it. And the thing ended up making, I don't know how many hundreds of millions, $400 million, something like that.
I don't have the number at hand.
He carried that anger with him. Did he ever get compensated in any way for the success of that film?
Well, I think the story I heard was that they did eventually cut him a check. I have to check what I wrote in the book, to be honest, because all I remember is it did become a big thing. And I think Maddie, there's another story about Maddie Simmons having a similar situation for National Lampoon's Vacation. But I think it was a bone of contention, and he was offered points on the film, but he turned it down because that's Candy also. In terms of decisions he made, a lot of times he was a working actor, and some of the decisions he made to take parts were based on, this paycheck will get me a little bit of freedom to think about this next thing. So if you pay me in cash or pay me in check or whatever, but pay me now the thing that I'm owed, and we'll move on. If it's a gamble, if you don't know if Home Alone's going to be a huge hit, film hanging on this second time actor, Macaulay Culkin, and it's got a lot of juice. It's getting a lot of hype. It's going to be promoted, but you don't know. So you don't know it's going to be a massive hit, perhaps defining the Jaws of that kind of comedy. In terms of, nobody thought Jaws was going to be a huge hit either,
No.
So I think there was a sense that because it was Hughes, they were going to make it right, and they offered him a lot more things, and but it is another example of, if I may have referred to my earlier book, the Kids in the Hall book was called One Dumb Guy, because several of the guys in the troupe said that there are 5 smart guys who make one dumb guy when they get together and make the worst business decisions in the world. And a lot of times we don't know. And in the book, you see John wrestling with trying to get, he changes his agents a lot, and he starts his own company, Frostbacks Productions, because he wants to have some sense that he can call the shots, find parts that are really either really funny or really dramatic, and really nurture his own career, because he felt that he was at the mercy of what was offered to him. And sometimes what was offered to him undervalued him, or underused him, or underutilized him. And I think that's why he if he had lived, who knows what Frostbacks would have done. It's hard to know.
Yeah. Let me just step aside here from his film career, if I can, Paul. Talk about some of the other adventures that he did that were brilliant, and I touched on it very briefly. Radio Candy, which he did with Doug Thompson. Now, for people we're not from Toronto, Doug Thompson was one of the great creative minds for Chum Radio when they dominated contemporary radio at the time in Toronto, and became friends with John and worked for John for years and years and years. They did Radio Candy for, I can't remember how many years, but almost like a weekly thing. They pumped it out. And again, here comes all of his friends coming in to do bits here and there and here and there and here and there. And then there was Camp Candy, which was an animated series. And the beauty of Camp Candy was, and this was John, unlike so many other actors who work with kids, John treated these kids like young adults, not like kids.
Mm-hmm. It's true. No, there's a couple of things I want to say. So Doug Thompson and him met when I think he did the History of Rock and Roll, a syndicated radio show. I think it was for Chum, and I think it was a network. It was syndicated, right?
Yep.
And so, and they hit it off immediately. And Candy loved the idea. This relates to the animation as well. He loved the idea that after being on SCTV, where they had to do tons and tons of characters with makeup and costumes, 3 hours in the chair to become Boris, to become Orson Welles or Divine or whatever. Suddenly he could do something where it was just his voice. And they did sketches, and they would have his friends from SCTV, but also other people like Levon Helm come by to the studio in Los Angeles, where Doug Thompson was engineering it and producing it. And they, I was so lucky to find Doug Thompson because he told me stories of so many stories that are in the book are just because Doug remembers everything. So by the time they're doing Camp Candy too, he's got Chris and Jen, his kids, and he really treats his kids with respect. And I really feel he was a great dad. And you can also see that in Uncle Buck, his relationship to young Gabby Hoffman and young Macaulay Culkin, who are both, I think, first timers in film at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And he treats, and the teenager in the movie, Jean Louise Kelly, I think her name is, and he treats them all with an actorly respect that other actors noticed. And it's anyway. So there's this thing when he does Camp Candy, again, he can do voices and doesn't have to be dressed up for this thing. And there was also an environmental theme to it. Like they put in a few things that were really prescient, like the camp was also an eco camp, and they would teach kids to take care of nature. But they had Harry Nilsson doing the theme song for it. Like it's so crazy, and it's a crazy. I love Harry. I love Harry's music, and like this song is so Harry Nilsson. And you hear there's a story of them recording the session for the theme, and John gets to sing along in the studio with him, and it's just you picture the amount of bourbon that flowed that night must have been insane.
Yeah. Yes, I'm sure. And
there's always an element of that,
And the great celebrities that showed up on like the late Clarence Clemens, the sax player for the E Street Band, for Bruce Springsteen's band. He was on there and invited John to join Bruce and he on stage in concert. Did he ever do that?
No, I don't think he did. He may have gone to a show.
Anxiety would have driven him nuts,
yeah,
I would think.
Yeah, because John could drum. John had a set of drums at the studio, and I don't know if he would have got up there and taken Max Weinberg's chair, but he, but rock and rollers actually really loved SCTV, and they showed up in Edmonton a lot for the show. But also, John Candy was in the Wilbury Twist, the Traveling Wilburys. So there's a couple of stories like that where and of course. The Tubes went sushi fishing with him in Edmonton. So that was pretty cool. The fish and musician character was such a great gateway into having musicians be on SCTV. And of course they used them in other Rick Moranis had different musicians in his sketches. So, but it was the rock and roll connection is very, it's a big part of that era of comedy because comedy was rock and roll and rock and roll was comedy,
Yeah.
So
sure.
it's definitely kind of interesting for me autobiographically. I write books about musicians and I write books about comedians, and I think the reason is that to grow up when I grew up, my heroes were Led Zeppelin, the Beatles, Monty Python, and Saturday Night Live and Second City Television. So, like, who am I? I don't know, but these are the things that define the things I'm interested in. I love musicians with a sense of humor, and I love comedians with a sense of rock and roll.
And there's a real brotherhood between, as you mentioned, between musicians and comedians, as there is between musicians and or comedians and athletes as well. Athletes want to be musicians. Musicians want to be athletes. Musicians want to be comedians. Comedians want to be hockey players and football players. John wanted to be a football player growing up, and as you'd mentioned at the outset of this interview, his knee got blown apart, and there goes any potential career. But like, I can't play football. Who cares? I'll buy part of the Argos, and he did with Wayne Gretzky,
with a hockey player. It's hilarious.
Yes, all Canadian, huh?
So. His love of hockey, by the way, something he shared with John Hughes. John Hughes, surprisingly, was a Detroit Red Wings fan, but so they would go to a lot of games in Chicago and Toronto and in Detroit as well. And one of the things, and Los Angeles, so they would be at the Forum, and they would go see the Kings. And he got to know Bruce McNall because he was owning the Kings at the time, and the big star player, Canadian, was Wayne Gretzky. They raided him away from Edmonton, much like Candy had come from Edmonton to Los Angeles via Toronto. But so that friendship and that, being treated really nicely by the LA Kings organization got him acquainted with the front office. And that's so the opportunity to buy the beloved Toronto Argonauts comes up as a three-way partnership between Candy, Gretzky, and McNall. They say that, people should never open a restaurant. If you make money, you should never open a restaurant. Maybe owning a sports franchise is also one of the things you shouldn't do, but he did it, and it can work. I mean, Ryan Reynolds is doing it right now.
Yeah.
Elton John's done it. Rod Stewart's done it. And what it did work in the short term, his enthusiasm for bringing a kind of Hollywood promotional aesthetic to the Toronto Argonauts and the entire Canadian Football League did result in some of the most exciting years for the CFL, and certainly for the Toronto Argonauts. He really jazzed up the CFL for that 1 or 2 seasons.
Brett Gallagher, who was a close friend and confidant of John's, worked with John for years, told me stories about how John would be on location somewhere in, let's say, St. Louis, and the Argos were about to play against Saskatchewan in Regina. And so John said, I got to go and help promote this game. So a couple of days before the game, John would, he'd do his part and say, okay, I'm taking a couple of days off, would rent a plane at his own expense, fly out to Regina, spend like 2-3 days there, do every morning show, every newspaper, television interview possible to promote not only the Argos, but the CFL and the game itself. And he would do this throughout the until he eventually thought, this is stupid. McNall is ripping us off.
Well, that's true. And there's a lot of the league got a little freaked out by Candy's energy and influence, even though he kind of I think he personally saved the Ottawa Rough Riders one year.
Yeah.
He kind of got involved in some of that, but there was definitely some pushback of, as there always is in our country, when a celebrity who lives in America suddenly comes home and starts telling you how to live. Talk to me about that another day. But the interesting thing here too is that he not only he's kind of avoiding taking on movie roles sometimes because he doesn't want to interrupt with the season, and so the Hollywood people are getting mad at him. But I was lucky, by the way, to speak to both Brett Gallagher and some of the other people who were working for the Argos at the time, and also speak with John's personal day-to-day guy, who was Robert Crane Jr. And so I have notes from inside those conversations. Brett Gallagher traveled across the country with him and told me stories about being in Ottawa, being in, in various parts of the league in Edmonton. And, and it just, again, I'm really lucky that I got these conversations with these people, because it's not like secondhand information.
That's one of the things that
all love John.
That's one of the things that I really liked about the book. To be honest with you, is I'm a huge fan of biographies to begin with, and autobiographies. But when I'm reading biographies, too often I've read where the author has not interviewed anyone. They've just taken quotes from interviews done in Time magazine or Playboy magazine or from some other source. I'm thinking, well, that's not really writing a book. All you're doing is just yanking other people's work and putting it together. But you talk to all these people.
My first choice is talking to people, and sometimes it's impossible if they've passed away. Like I didn't get to talk to Carl Reiner. I had hoped to talk to Carl Reiner, but I had no idea that the man who seemingly was going to live forever would suddenly pass away. But luckily, other people who I knew had interviewed him and offered me the transcripts, And so there's some interviews with John Candy in the book that were never published before because Toronto journalist Rob Salem had written an entire piece, and he didn't end up publishing it. And he said, you can use it, and I gave him credit, but these are firsthand quotes from John Candy that I wouldn't have gotten otherwise. And so thanks, Rob. And there's a lot of things like that. But as much as I can, I will talk to them in the first person. Like Dan Aykroyd, who was so generous to the point where he told me so much. He was so important. The first guy who got him into improv comedy, he worked with him years later in Blues Brothers. Then tried to get him in Ghostbusters. They do The Great Outdoors, Nothing But Trouble. And then he has the most amazing eulogy for Candy at his Los Angeles funeral. So then after he'd given me that, and I got the transcript of that eulogy, I then said, who has to write the foreword? And he's been so generous. He's so generous. I don't know if I could go back to him, but I kind of sucked it up and went, I got to send an email to his publicist and say, if Danny can write the foreword, we would love him to do that, because I can think of no one. Honestly, I couldn't think of anyone better. And he did it. And he did it within like a 5-day period where we didn't hear from him. And he didn't say he was going to do it or anything. And suddenly it shows up.
Yeah.
Which I love. I love the way Dan Aykroyd operates. He investigates UFOs all the time. And now he shows up in mysterious ways, so he's and I learned a lot about Aykroyd during this process, by the way. Like, I started to realize this is a guy who created the Ghostbusters and Blues Brothers, that those things didn't exist. They're not like time-honored things. It's not like every generation has a Ghostbusters. No, he created the Ghostbusters in his head. And like, there's a guy who deserves his own book,
Yeah. Well, his family history to begin with is in Kingston, what he means to that city, and what I think he still has a place outside of Kingston.
He does.
Now.
In fact, when I spoke to him, he was on the phone walking around a farm in Kingston. I could only picture it, but it was amazing.
Only the Lonely, which starred Maureen O'Hara, who came out of retirement to do this film, but she said, I will only do it if I can meet John Candy. And she met John, and I saw the clip that you talked about in your book about him, the two of them on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, and and you talk about his eyes, and she says, I looked into his eyes, and I thought, wow, what a beautiful man. And then she said something that validated him at a point where he really needed it, where she said, this man is a terrific actor. And that's what John wanted to hear. Yeah, I'm not just a funny guy, I'm an actor. And that meant so much to him. And she said it on The Tonight Show at a time when everybody watched Johnny Carson and The Tonight Show. It's not like today where everybody's all over the place.
It's fragmented. Yeah, it's all, cable clips or YouTube clips. But, she would say when he came on the set, she would say, the actor is here, the actor. And it wasn't being sarcastic, but, and again, I was lucky to have Robert Crane Jr. telling me that, and Chris Columbus, I keep calling him Christopher. Chris Columbus also, who directed that film, he remembers Maureen saying it all the time. And Jim Belushi even told me that story, because he's in that film. And so I felt like in many ways that I almost got a bird's eye view of what it was like to shoot that movie. And he fought for her, as you know from the book.
Yes,
she had retired and wasn't no longer really well known, but Candy knew her from being John Wayne's girlfriend in a lot of John Wayne movies, and amongst other great roles. And so when they get to the set, Candy by then is a huge star, and he's got this massive trailer. It's the name above the title gets the big trailer, and he sees Maureen O'Hara has this squat little tiny trailer like a caravan, and he says, "Why does this woman's like a main actor in this film playing my mother, and she's the great Maureen O'Hara?" And he said, "You know what?" He tells his crew, his home, he has this entourage of people that he calls the, what do they call? I forget the name. Anyway, he's got his, I'm blanking on the name because it's like a Mexican name. And he has them all clear out his trailer, and they take all his stuff out and start to ask Maureen O'Hara's assistant if they can move all her stuff in. Meanwhile, the producers are freaking out that John Candy is now, taking control of this situation. And he basically shames them, and they give Maureen O'Hara. They find a big trailer for her. They find a big trailer for her, and then they suddenly have two big trailers. They didn't have it before, And so, Jim Belushi tells me that story with great relish because he said it was just a masterclass in watching somebody stand up for someone, much like he had with, the writer's room with Catherine O'Hara and Andrea Martin and himself. He stood up for the people who he felt were, but he also stood up for crew people.
Yeah. Oh, even going back to SCTV, when he realized that the cast and crew were being fed reheated takeout chicken food, chicken dinners.
Takeout chicken. Yeah.
He says, "What is this all about?" Yeah, it just freaked out about it.
These people are working hard, and you expect them to take this reheated crap, So he put his fist to the wall on that occasion too.
And during that, or after the filming of Only the Lonely, he was so grateful to Chris Columbus that he said, quote, "Nobody thinks of me in this kind of role." He says, "I'm capable of doing a food fight, but I know I can do more. I'd like to be able to show it." And Only the Lonely allowed him to do that. And at this point, you're thinking, wow, if you're following his career as closely, not as closely as we do now, but you would think, yeah, it's the beginning. But unfortunately, JFK came along, Oliver Stone's film. He was great in that. Almost got cut out of the film.
Yeah, and certainly the part
learned to do the.
You go ahead.
No, I know we're getting the time delay. Yeah, the thing here. He learned the accent, the agent, the Cajun accent, the Louisiana accent perfectly, but almost left on the floor.
Yeah, and the part you see in the movie is much. There's much more to it, and he spent a lot of time working on that. And Stone, I didn't get to talk to Stone firsthand, but there's a lot of film of him during the press junket talking about what a great actor John Candy was.
Yeah.
And he really noticed there's a subtlety in this character. So the character of Dean Andrews Jr. in JFK is supposed to be threatening Kevin Costner's character, but he's also himself afraid. So it's a real actor's thing to dial in this perfectly subtle, I'm afraid, but I'm also threatening you. It's like I'm afraid, but I want you to be afraid. And It was this thing. And the Cajun accent apparently was super authentic. And he spent a lot of time with a dialect coach. And Jennifer Candy is quoted in the book as saying that, she remembers him, being sort of apologetic for not working on schoolwork with her because he had to study his own accent work. And, he really spent extra time on that. And I think the contention I've been making lately is, if he had been given a role, if he had lived and he'd been given a role, say the equivalent weight of Robin Williams in Good Will Hunting,
right?
If he'd had a role like that where he got to play this, straight character with, a little bit of sense of humor, but mostly pathos, he could have had an Oscar. I think he should have had an Oscar.
But isn't it true, Paul, what they say about actors that comedians can do dramatic parts? Most dramatic actors can't do comedy.
That's true. Yeah, there's an old saying is dying is easy, comedy is hard. Laurence Olivier had a great respect for. I remember reading that he had a great respect for comedy, and he actually could do comedy, and I've seen him do it. But Peter Sellers, to me, is one of the great actors of all time.
Yeah.
But you know him as a comedian, but the depth of his work in being there, there's room, and like I mentioned, Robin, and I think Tom Hanks has had moments where he's been a great actor and a great comedian. I mean, it is possible, and certainly I've seen a lot of the current screen actresses, like Catherine O'Hara, do parts that are real serious.
Yeah,
and I think you have it. You can have it.
Cool Runnings, which was a huge box office success, not so great when it came to the reviews. Was one of those films that again was John was good in it, but he didn't really. The reviews about John weren't all that great in that, and all of a sudden there was this little crack in that he's critic proof.
Yeah, in some extent he was, but the other thing about that film is that it did endure because it has a legacy of being like the Mighty Ducks, like one of those family films about sports that people love, and they love candy in it. So you can, maybe like the same way that Paul McCartney was. I've been reading a lot about Paul McCartney. Paul McCartney was critically maligned for the first 5-6 years of Wings, of solo material. I was a big fan, so I was buying those records, and those records all charted. And at the same time, Rolling Stone said that he was a hack, So in hindsight, we look back and we go, tell me that Jet and Band on the Run aren't great records.
Yeah.
I mean, I will fight you. I will come across there. I will fight you. But
yes,
there's something to be said for, critics also hate it when you confound them. Critics hate it when you go around them. And because our job is to be the gatekeeper. And what are you doing having a huge critical hit? I mean, a huge box office hit when it was a critical failure. That's what I mean. And it's like they almost get more mad.
Yeah. In addition to beginning to prove that he was a great actor, dramatic actor, if you will, he made his debut as a director in a made-for-TV film called Hostage for a Day.
Yeah, that was I don't think it was the greatest film. It was made for TV, but what it did was it showed that John could take a part that was kind of written for him, and he gave it to George Wendt, who became the sort of de facto. So as John Hughes had done for him, he let the part be for someone else, and George Wendt, who was also a Chicago Second City guy and had been big on Cheers, he took that role, and Robin Duke gets hired from Second City. And a lot of other Toronto Second City actors like John Hempel and Don Lake were all in it, and Catherine Greenwood. And but everyone who was on that set talks about what a great team director he was. He involved everyone and really made the film shoot move and tightened up the comedy and all the things that could be great. I think ultimately it just, there's a lot of things in it that didn't work, but at the same time, it's there. Like I think he needed to direct 2 more films before he became a great director. And unfortunately, that was the last year of his life. So
yeah, and this is when I talked earlier about how the book started to sadden me in the last few chapters, and then we get down to the point where the last few films that he did, and you touched briefly on Wagons East, and then there's Canadian Bacon, and none of these films really lived up to a standard. And you think to yourself, my God, this is totally unfair that a man's career, his legacy should not end on a bunch of duds. But thank God, people being what they are, we don't remember that. We just sort of cast that aside and say, no, I choose to remember Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, Uncle Buck, and the greatness of SCTV and Radio Candy and all those things. And thank God it's like we forget about bad memories a lot easier than we do good memories.
If I may quote Barbra Streisand, what's too painful to remember, we simply choose to forget.
Memories.
We will remember the way we were. And I believe is that a Paul Williams song? Anyway, I digress. But my point being, there is the beauty of 31 years of hindsight to be able to look back on the career. This is a book that I feel like I could write from where I am with what I know about show business as well, what I know about the business of making art and the business of I've studied a few showbiz careers, and I sort of have a lot of empathy for the idea of making choices that you think are the best at the time. Like the Kids in the Hall talk about this in their book. The best thing you thought was being offered to you, you just take it because you need to go from A to B. You need to be working. You need to be learning. You need to be doing stuff. And you don't see every project as the defining role. Nothing is going to, like, who knew that Planes, Trains, and Automobiles would be the defining role? Like, he probably thought, this is my film for this year. Next year I have another film. And, the only thing I could say that I would tell anyone is life runs out, and you really need to, if you can remember to be present for all of it, which is another John Hughes thing. Actually, I just realized Ferris Bueller, like, life happens fast. If you don't look around, you're going to miss it, and my favorite Matthew Broderick line, but also John Hughes. So, I do think that I've learned a lot from it, like, that are life lessons for everybody in this book. And I'm not saying that it's a self-help book, but, modeling empathy, and just looking at, you can be remembered for a lot of things beyond your worst moment if you have several great moments.
Yeah, that's a good point. And when you think about him, here he was, a great father, terrific husband, Couldn't have a better friend, more generous, loved people in general, just loved life, and a terrific talent. The book portrays it all, and the sad parts of it, the gripping, hurtful parts when you see the way he's treated by people, and you feel for the anxiety and the panic attacks that he. I mean, I was sitting there and I'm sweating my palms. I'm thinking like, God, there's that one scene where he's in a mall and he's like by himself and
In
250 and 250 people can all suddenly surround him, and he's like, I'm thinking, oh my God, I would have lost it.
He literally has a football player as his escort at that moment, take him out,
Yeah.
Kelvin Prunster from the Toronto Argonauts.
That's right. That's right.
So he's hired him as his personal security guard. Because one of the benefits of having the Argos on your
Yes.
your Rolodex.
Yeah.
So you literally have someone blocking for him, which I think is fitting, really. But yeah, no, it was sad. Like, and he was just wanted to nip out, and I think he was trying to buy Christmas presents for the kids at the mall on a day off, and then school lets out, and the blessing and curse of being one of the most famous actors at the time and being larger, so he stands out in a crowd, so he couldn't just blend in on a street scene, so it's unfortunate.
Whether you're a fan of John Candy's, or you know a lot or a little about him, or you show business, if you care, you don't really care about, it's a great book.
Thank you so much.
On so many levels, and I congratulate you for the effort that you put in it, because I'm just trying to think of, wow, the man hours just in the interviews alone and compiling all that. You did a great job, and congratulations to you.
Well, thank you. It is a lot of work, and at the same time, it's rewarding work. And my hair wasn't white when I started this. No, I'm just kidding. But I'm about to start another one, and I can't say what it is yet. But it's this idea of, do I really want to start this again? Another 3 years of this? But how many Thanksgivings and Christmases have I worked through? I try not to. That's the other thing about loving. You have to love your life. You have to live your life, and you got to have life to make new things. So stay alive, stay healthy. So thank you so much, Ted. It means a lot for you to say that.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for the book. Thanks for taking the time. All my best to your brother, by the way.
Oh yeah. He sends his regards too. He says he always thanks you for the generosity that you showed in earlier parts of his career, and the legacy lives on.
I was just there. I don't think I did much except hang there and with my jaw up and going, wow. All the best.
Same to you. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Well, that's going to do it for another episode of the Ted Wallachin Podcast. Thanks again to Paul Gatt. Thanks again to the fine folks at Tom's Place in the heart of Kensington Market. Fine clothing. Terrific prices. Excellent prices. Really. And thanks to Bike Thieves for the music they provide to which each and every week. Don't forget, drop by our website, www.tedwallachin.ca, and check out our past episodes. Also leave some comments, questions, and sign up. It's free, by the way, to our YouTube channel. In the meantime, while you're online, fill out your organ and tissue donation cards. You could change or even save a life. In the meantime, have a great week.
Could have worn another shirt.